Hey everyone, I'm Michael Tuso and I am the Director of Revenue Performance at Chili Piper and today's moderator for our panel, Selling While LGBTQ+. I am so excited to be here with you today to discuss a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I personally have met more LGBT sales leaders assembling today's panel than I have in my cumulative sales career combined. Being an only and wanting to help tackle this issue head on is a big reason and motivator for me personally, and I know many others I've spoken to as well. And so in searching for some of those resources personally, I found that none had both that modern and really for LGBTQ plus take on it. And so today's goal is to be that resource for people. So for today's panel, we're talking to three incredible sales professionals who I've gotten to know over the past couple of months and who have done so much for their companies and the industry by not only excelling in their roles and being amazing salespeople, but by helping others pave the way as well. And so I asked them all to join us here today. And I also want to thank the other side of sales for being so forward-thinking on this topic and hosting this for us today. So I'm so thrilled to spotlight our panelists and have them introduce themselves today. Rachel, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Rachel Biers. My pronouns are she, her. I am a senior account executive at Bevy. And I've been selling for about 8 years. And a quick fun fact about me, I have lived in 8 countries before turning 18.
Awesome. Sunanda?
Hey all, Sunanda here. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm currently an enterprise account executive at Tidelift. I've been selling for about I think close to 10 years. And something fun about myself, I played online poker competitively for about a few years before I had to get a real job.
Awesome.
That's pretty cool.
Tim?
I'm Tim O'Keefe. I go by he, him. I am a sales director over at Liventon. I've been selling roughly now for about 6 years. I guess a little fun fact about myself that's my go-to is before selling, I actually used to be a exotic animal trainer, working with over 100 different species. So yeah, that was kind of fun.
That's awesome. Cool. So I know people are eager to hear from everyone today. I know I'm super eager to hear from all of our panelists as well. So I'd love to jump right into some of the questions that we've assembled for you all. Let's start with Sunanda to kick us off. Sunanda, how did you get into sales? What made you choose sales as a profession?
I always like to say that sales chose me. So my background in the first, probably right after college for 8 years, is actually public health and science, cognitive science. And I was working with a lot of NGOs, doing business development, marketing, that sort of thing. And actually intended to go into tech in a marketing role and was interviewed by a VP of sales. And he made me an offer to be a sales rep. I thought he was crazy. I told him he's still one of my mentors, but yeah, that's I dove in, and that's how I got into sales.
Awesome.
That's pretty cool. It's funny you say that. I kind of fell into sales myself. Kind of going off of the fun fact I shared. I grew up overseas, and my parents are U.S. diplomats, so that's kind of always the track that I expected for myself after college. And then the more that I learned about sales, the more I kind of realized it was a combination of everything that I loved, because I was a peace and conflict studies major at school. And with my background, right, like, let's pull those elements of mediation, you're going to have negotiation, and just like overall having the ability to empathize and put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? Like the goal is to come to a mutual like mutually beneficial agreement, which I guess is like a pretty diplomatic way of defining sales. So it ended up actually working out.
I could see how that might be useful. No wonder why you're so good at sales, Rachel. Okay, Tim, I'm so curious. How did you make the career jump from training animals to being in sales?
So after that, my Tiger King life, if you will, I moved to New York City for another job offer. That job actually fell through, and I went through a recruiter then. And then I guess the theme of our little group is that they suggested entry-level sales jobs. So I kind of also fell into sales. Didn't think I could do it at first, and then found out that so much about it is like communication and talking to people, which I love. So then just kind of continued to pursue it in a sales career.
And off of that, Tim, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job?
Yeah, I would say I really love building the client relationships. I think the most rewarding is I become very close with them. I try to become their friends, if you will. And then when they actually leave and go to a new job, and I'm one of the first people they contact within the first few weeks, it just is very rewarding to show like, oh, hey, my offering is great, but then also like they really want to work with me again, even though they're in a new position. I really like that aspect of the role.
Absolutely. What about you, Sunanda or Rachel? Also, Tim, I think we lost your video.
Oh, no.
It's okay.
Yeah.
While he's getting set up there, Sunanda, you want to go?
Yeah. I mean, so I think for me, it's, very similar to what Tim mentioned. I think also just the challenge. Sales is not easy, which is, a challenge in itself. And I think it's incredibly rewarding to have a win-win in helping people with whatever they need, and doing that in a way that makes sense for the people we're talking to and selling to, and as well as our own companies.
Oh, cool. Okay, I can see Tim now, and everybody's telling me that they can too. So, Tim, you want to? Maybe it was me. Tim, you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, I was trying to fix my camera. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, absolutely. What's the most rewarding part of your job?
Yeah, I think it is just building those client relationships, right? So just really kind of, and then fostering those relationships and continuing them when my clients find new roles elsewhere, and then building up that client, helping them get promoted internally with like, hey, like I really think that you are a fit for our product. Like, let me join your team, if you will, and pretend like I'm one of your coworkers at your company, and really try to get you promoted and excel in your career too.
I think the common thread across all of us is those relationships that we build, right? And feeling privileged to be able to work with the people that we get to, whether that's internally within our company or the customers, right? And I personally feel super lucky to be selling a platform that literally helps people build community, which I think, given everything that is happening right now in the world, is so important. So that personally gives me a lot of joy to play a very small role in helping others be able to come together and connect and build those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And so getting at the kind of topic of today a little bit more, Rachel, would love to kind of hear your perspective on this concept of what we mean when we come to work, how we bring our full selves. Like, what does that mean? How does your personal life influence some of these things we're talking about, in sales in general? How does your work life influence sales and being a sales professional, and how does that, influence your personal life as well?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. For me, my sort of personal journey in gaining more confidence in my identity really bled through and showed in my work and in that environment. Like one example, which seems small, but I think it's really meaningful for other folks that are, LGBTQ in sales. When I first started in tech sales out of college, I pretty much just wore like what was expected of me, right? Or at least that was my understanding. So it was the dresses and the skirts, which is probably pretty surprising for the folks that know me, because that's what I understood to be acceptable.
Yeah.
And honestly, I was really meek at work, and I was not confident in my role. And that really showed in my performance because I wasn't comfortable just being in my own skin. So for me, when I think about what is excellence in sales, I think a huge tenet of that is having executive presence, right? And so that confidence is so important for that, and I just didn't have it. So when I became more comfortable with presenting more masculine of center, and I brought that from my personal life into the work environment, I just felt so much more comfortable in my own skin and the way that I was presenting myself, albeit through my clothing, right? And that confidence really carried forward in my demos, in those negotiations, and the relationships that I built with my colleagues and my customers, because I was able to be authentically me.
I love that. So being able to channel like who you are, maybe outside of work a little bit into your work presence, so that even if it's something simple like using the clothing example, you feel like that gave you the added confidence to be successful at work?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Tim, Sunanda, would love to hear from you on that question, on the whole idea of like being able to bring our full selves to work. Like, how do you do that? How do you encourage other people to do that as well? Would love to hear from you all too.
I think what Rachel said about it. She mentioned executive presence. I think having executives doing that themselves sets a tone, and allows other people, including myself, to bring other dimensions of who I am to work, and that can in itself kick off a domino effect, where everyone sort of feels more safe and able to talk about those things or talk about different parts of themselves. And to me, to Rachel's point, I think that can only help, because it does, when you're feeling like you are yourself, you're going to do better, you're going to present better, you're going to, have more confidence. And so I think a lot of that is just modeling it. If I'm at an organization, making sure that I'm visible to people who might not want to, or not know how to bring themselves to work, their full selves. I've also been, fortunate enough, when I started my sales career, my first sales manager, modeled that really well on the sales floor and purposely, diversified his team. And that just made it easier for everyone to do it.
I love that comment, like the purposeful diversification, because there's so many things that have shown that the ROI is better when you do that. It's not just an altruistic things to do. When you're bored, when you're C-suite, when your manager team is as reflective of your customers and the outside world, that people are better, more productive, happier, and whole. And so I think you really are hitting on something so important, because if we're only building organizations where people are bringing half of themselves to work, we're not building an organization that is ultimately serving our customers to the full possible extent that they could. So I really like that.
Yeah, and I think something important to note is when that VP left, and it was a small startup, a lot of other people who, a lot of the team left, which means a lot of the diversity in the company left, which impacted how the company did. I mean, I ended up leaving and going to where my new boss, or my old boss, was going to, but you could see it impact the way, because the person who took over wasn't really about bringing accepting all of those differences, and it created an atmosphere that people just didn't want to be at.
Yeah, I've found that a lot of times those atmospheres that also don't practice that sort of tolerance or that intentional diversification actually end up being like more toxic. And some of these things that we see talked about with like sales culture, so much of that can be answered with diversifying our teams and being more intentional about that practice, and making sure that people have a seat at the table. And if you're noticing that people of any group, not just LGBT, don't have a seat at the table, you probably have rampant cognitive bias all throughout your hiring processes. And so, I think that this like concept of seat at a table is so important. Tim, did you have something on that topic too?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, when you have that support, even I know we talked about the executives, but I think it's also important to have it from people at your own level, your own coworkers. Because I remember when I first started my career, I wasn't focusing so much on the presentations, and my presentation skills weren't that good. I was busy focusing on, oh, is my voice deep enough? Oh, did I wear too tight of jeans today? Like, oh, how should I present myself for this client meeting? Oh, how do my coworkers feel about this? Instead of focusing on like a, hey, am I making eye contact? Hey, like, how are the audience reacting to what I'm saying? Am I hitting all the points? Like, your focus is just more diverted, if you will, compared to when you are in a supportive environment. You know that those people don't care. They know that they accept you for your full self, and then you can actually focus on what needs to get done. And then, like Rachel said earlier, your performance just keeps exceeding, and really you're able to kind of be your highest potential.
That's so true. When you're thinking about all these other things that honestly we shouldn't have to be thinking about as much if we're building the right inclusive cultures, you know, your tonality is off on a sales call maybe, or, you know, you didn't strike that exact like discovery that you wanted to be able to do. Like when your mind is preoccupied with some of those things, I think that, you know, it can, you know, definitely impact performance. So, okay. So, Tim, for you again, pivoting back to like diversity in general, like why is diversity and inclusion like in the workplace important to begin with? I know we touched on it a little bit there, but kind of would love to hear from you a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think diversity obviously is very important to have in the workplace, especially with everything just changing so much. You really do need people from different backgrounds. You really do need people to challenge executives, to challenge each other, instead of having a room full of everyone with the same background, a room full of everyone who has that same mind thought, who are just kind of going to be yes men to one another. But I think the real important factor about diversity is not just having a diverse room, but having inclusivity. Like, you can have all the diversity in the world. I have been the diversity in the room, but I have not felt included. So that made me feel more shy, more timid. I didn't speak up. I didn't speak my mind. So having that supportive balance of the inclusivity, making the people who are diverse, the people who do have that different perspective, feel comfortable enough to voice that perspective, I think is really kind of the bigger milestone to have to achieve. That way that you can build off of each other and build off of what they bring to the table too.
Yeah, I think you're kind of touching on a subject that I see a lot, which is this idea of LGBT as token. And it's not just a checkbox for companies to, you know, we're talking about giving people a seat at the table a second ago, but just by, you know, hiring a DI officer or even a sales manager, you know, doesn't necessarily to check the box fully. Why do you think that happens in organizations? And that's open to anybody.
I think it's because it's easy, right? Like when we look at what someone can do to check that box, pull in someone that identifies as that underrepresented group, and for a lot of folks, that's good enough. And so I think it's on everyone. It's really on leaders to actually take action on this. I just don't see we're seeing that enough. There's a ton of resources available to folks, and it's not reliant on that individual, that one person within that underrepresented group to be the advocate or the spokesperson, which often happens. And I'm sure all of us have experienced that to a certain degree.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, you know, because I'm a member of a group doesn't necessarily mean that I can speak for every single other member of that group as well.
It's a lot of pressure to put on that person too. And it's just like, oh, here I go. Like,
yeah,
let me watch what I say now, because I am the one speaking on behalf of all minorities.
But that's like a bias in and of itself, like saying that one person is representative of the whole, like that's a cognitive bias right there. So I think like so much of this, like you have to take these things out and really digest them a little bit because of that component as well. So I guess, Rachel, back to you on this one, but many of us haven't met others like us in sales. You know, I mentioned like I just met another LGBT male sales leader for the first time in my life, like May of 2020. I ended up like writing like a whole like post about it and things like that a few months ago. but, and I hear that a lot from other, people in the community, but why don't you think there's like more people like us in sales? Like if we're going by those anecdotes, like why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think it's a lack of conversations like the one we're having right now, right? Who is driving awareness and, more importantly, visibility of all of the amazing LGBTQ plus identifying salespeople and sales leaders, right? Like, I'm grateful to the other side of sales for allowing us to have this conversation. We need to have it more. And I think beyond having the conversation, we're also taught that certain identities are more accepted than others, right? We celebrate the stereotypes of the student athletes and the folks that graduate from the top universities, right? And we paint this story about how those experiences, those identities are really what helps someone excel in this role. When I really just don't think at this point we should be taking that at face value as an indicator of someone's ability to be successful. I mean, anyone from the LGBT community, if you want to talk about grit and resilience and perseverance, probably has a multitude of examples that they can pull from to share that. So I think there's a lot more there if we want to talk about recruiting and what folks look for when they think about a qualified salesperson.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Rachel. I think when you're talking about why we don't see it, I think it goes to what we view as like what a pipeline is for salespeople, right? And what does that pipeline look like? And in a lot of companies, unfortunately, still it's a box that gets checked off once, and it's done, and that's not going to be enough to attract people. As someone who made a career change into sales, had I not had the manager and the interview process as I did, I probably would have been stuck in my vision of what sales was, right? Like, which is not for me. And so I think, everything from the language you use in, job postings to the interview process itself, and who you look for and who can be a good salesperson, that is so important to think about as a leadership team and as managers. And I think that gets missed often.
Yeah, and I think it's like a great point to kind of build off of too as a sales rep. When you're kind of advancing through your career, you're looking at this sales team you're joining, and you just look and you're like, no one here is like me. And I've been intimidated too to accept certain roles where I'm like, okay, I'm joining this team, but just to have anyone kind of like be there from the executive standpoint, to have on your one-on-ones to be like, hey, how are you doing? Like anything that I can do to help, like thanks for being here kind of situation. Because it is intimidating, especially at like a new company or going on to a new team, to be like, okay, no one here is like me. How am I going to handle this? How am I going to bring my true self to have that best performance there?
Yeah. Rachel, I keep coming back to that, something you just said, which is like grit and rejection. And it's like, oh gosh, if I would summarize something about sales, it's being able to deal with that and push through and be successful anyway, despite the grit, despite the rejection. We kind of grow up our whole lives, we're shooting for that 100%. And then you get in the work world and you inverse that, and it's, a 20% close rate, a 30% close rate. So a lot of people struggle with like rejection in general. Like, why do you all feel like that gritty element for, LGBT people, might help them in sales?
Yeah, no, definitely. I love this kind of touching on the student athlete. We're always like, oh, the student athlete can get like knocked down and then get back up, and that makes a great seller. But like in terms of like the grit and resilience, like I would hire a team of all LGBT people, because coming out like in a conservative family, like you get knocked down pretty hard. And like, I'm sorry, the things that I've heard when I came out is a little bit harder than getting tackled by like a football or something. So kind of having that grit and that resilience is kind of just built in, I think, across multiple minorities too. I mean, ethnic, racial minorities, women, the things that we have to go through our personal lives even, I think just shows a great sense of resilience that if we get a bad client or a bad client email, it's not going to affect our day really. And we have that kind of built into us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can remember, I didn't do like a traditional sport. I did like martial arts, but I remember being in a locker room at one point and like hearing someone I really admired say an LGBT slur. And so I'm like thinking of these like micro moments of, growing up and how that played out to maybe an insecurity that, it was like, oh gosh, somebody doesn't like that. So I'm going to withhold that element to myself in a professional environment, in this environment. And then eventually, like, I had to go back and deconstruct that, because I'm like, wait a minute, you can't do that and be successful, or if you do, you're going to have all these issues. So I think that topic is just so very important. So we're talking about how to kind of pave the way a little bit more, some of our personal experiences. What about recruiting? How do we help them? Like, the world we live in is, especially in tech sales, can be very heteronormative, like just bluntly saying it. And so we go through a lot of these processes, and I know I felt at a time or two in my life that the process was almost built for someone else. So what are some takeaways from recruiting on this that we might want to highlight? If I am a forward-thinking ally and I'm out seeking information, we all mentioned we had trouble searching for that information too. So what are some of those takeaways that we might have for recruiting on this topic?
From my point of view, I think it, and someone just mentioned it in the chat, it has to be intentional from the moment you put a job posting up, or even before that, the conversations you have about what you're looking for and what that means. And there has to be an intentionality behind that. I think it's just as important to talk about what not to do, because I think this has affected a lot. An example of something, and this was, I think, over a year ago, was someone reached out to me, an opportunity, and it looked interesting. And I did some research, and I pointed out to the recruiter, I was like, hey, it looks like there's a lot of Glassdoor reviews. I know Glassdoor is not perfect, but there was seems like a lot of negative things coming from, the people who identified as in the sales org, and around diversity and inclusion and equity. And can you address that? And the person who, she responded to me and said, yeah, we're trying to fix that, which is why we're talking to you. And I'm like, that I'm not going to fix a problem. And that goes back to this checkbox of where recruiters are like, let's diversify, and not all recruiters, but, in this case, where I was literally like, yeah, I'm not interested, like nicely, but, I was like, I cannot be that fix for a company. That has to come from your HR team. That has to come from your leadership team. And if you're just, what I heard was you're looking for diverse candidates, and that's all you're looking for, and I'm going to be put in a potentially really terrible position. So I think what you avoid is just as important as like the intentionality piece as well.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that as well. What else could we potentially tell recruiting or HR even to improve, like maybe even off of that situation? Like if an organization isn't doing it the right way, what would they actually do? How would they go back into their organization aside from just trying to check that box? Because I think I see people struggle with that a lot. Is it enough to say we don't discriminate? Is it enough to say we're trying to check a box? Well, obviously it isn't. So what are some of those other things that we could do?
I'll say, like, when I've interviewed before in the past, things that really drew me to certain companies are when they have like a page that's like, oh, hey, we have like a pride group. And then beyond that, you see kind of the evidence. You see photos of like 50 employees at a pride parade. You see kind of like all the events that they've had or something like that. And it kind of really backs up that company's culture. And I go into it and I'm just like, oh, I would feel more welcomed here than at a company that may not have that, or like may not showcase those types of groups or people within their organization.
Yeah. It's like I'm good on the ping pong table and the free lunch. Like,
yeah.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Okay, so how can we help more LGBT, people break into sales? A lot of us have had success like in the sales realm already. How do we help others kind of take that leap of faith as well?
I mean, I think, again, going back to being visible and sharing our stories, even just hearing about all of our backgrounds and how we got into sales, I think it's fair to say that they were all pretty like non-traditional, right?
Yeah.
And helping people feel comfortable that it's okay to bring your whole self to work and show people that there are places where they will be accepted.
Exactly.
So these types of conversations are just so important. But beyond that, finding ways to serve as a mentor. And I get the sense that sometimes people feel very intimidated by the thought of mentorship, right? And really, you can do that in a formal capacity and set up regular time, or you can serve as a role model for other LGBT folks and do it informally. There's not a right way to do it. And aside from what I think we can all do as individuals, going back to everything we just talked about with leadership at a company and recruiting policies, right? Be an advocate at your company on hiring and recruiting tactics. Look at the language that you use when you are creating job descriptions. Make sure that if you want diversity, there's diversity represented in the hiring panel, right? So you get a diverse array of perspectives on the folks that you are interviewing. Diversity initiatives, ERGs, right? And again, this isn't just for LGBT folks, right? It's anyone who brings a diverse perspective. And like, we need to make sure that that conversation includes all of these underrepresented groups.
Yeah, I love that point of bringing in more people on the diversity panel, because if I'm getting interviewed by the same person, same type of person over and over again, I'm not going to join that company. I'm not even going to feel comfortable in the interview. But the second, maybe they're in a different role, but like sales, you work with every department. So if you bring in someone who maybe is like in engineering or in marketing, not necessarily in the sales org, it just makes you feel more comfortable in the interview process. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm not about to join this bro fest. Like, they do have more diversity here. It's more reflective of the company, even though it might not be as reflective on the sales team.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said about, at larger companies with, recruiting from the pool of talent you already have, which is something I think a lot of people ignore. And you see a lot of, I've personally seen a lot of people in, different roles that have an interest in sales, but the representation they see is like, oh, that's not for me. And being able to change that and allow people to find their way. We hear about, at companies, people shifting gears all the time, but very rarely do we hear, oh, someone decided to go into sales. Usually it's the opposite. And I think there's a reason behind that. And that's, not intentionally setting the culture of your sales team internally as well.
I think that's awesome. And you all obviously hit the nail on the head. So to kind of piggyback off that, so you talk about people breaking into sales. What about sales leadership? How can we encourage more? Because, it is important, I think, to be able to have that person that paved that way and fought for you. And, we all know what it feels like to have a manager who does and doesn't fight for you, and how different it is just as like a human being, but also in the context of LGBT. How do we get people to kind of take that other leap, which is like sales leadership and management in general? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think the big thing that kind of comes to mind for me with this question is sales leaders looking at those transferable skills. Like, we all see the salesperson as this type of person. But if they look at people who might be in entry-level positions at their company who are looking for something more challenging, maybe it's an account manager who's just annoyed that their book of business will only hit a certain peak and like bring them on to sales. Or maybe it's someone in recruiting who also has those sales tendencies to bring on more and more clients. So instead of just thinking, oh, has this person been in a sales role before? Have they hit their quota? Maybe picking out people who are on different teams who have those more transferable skills. Because if a manager comes up to you in an entry-level role, which happened to me, you feel very confident in it. You're like, oh, this person sees something in me. I could do this. I can actually be a seller. I can kind of go this path. And it boosts this whole new sense of confidence for you. And you do have the transferable skills from other roles into be in sales, as we've all found out in our earlier careers.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So how do we've obviously all been in uncomfortable situations, like as LGBT sellers. Sunanda, do you have any examples of this?
Yeah, I think there's, two examples that come to mind. One is people make assumptions all the time. They default to the, heteronormative sort of framework, which I think is just the society we live in, but challenging that, when I talk to either internal or external people, sometimes, there's small talk before meetings, and I have a son, so people are like, oh, how's your, what does your husband do? And I was like, oh, I don't have a husband, I have a wife, right? And I say that intentionally, and it's incredibly uncomfortable, right? But the reason I do it is because if it's going to be uncomfortable for me, if I can put it out there, then maybe it'll be less comfortable for the next person and the next person. And maybe that person who I was talking to will, start being a little bit more cognizant about, the wording they use. Something else that, has come up is it's really odd. I was reflecting on this, is, I'm queer and, I happen to be married to a woman. I've seen and I've experienced in all male selling groups, their derogatory remarks against women, and somehow they think that's going to be okay with me. Because I'm a woman married to a woman, which calling that out right away. And it's incredibly uncomfortable. And in a lot of cases, it can put you in, it can create this divisiveness on a team that you want to feel part of. But it's important I think it's important to either, if you don't feel like you have the voice to say it there, go to someone you can trust. And if you don't have someone you can trust, my personal, recommendation would be start thinking about, where you're at, because that's a serious problem.
Yeah, I like that point on the wife, not husband situation, the first one you mentioned. I kind of have grown to experience that discomfort as almost like growth in my own mind. I'm like, okay, we're both growing here. Like, I'm embracing this uncomfortable situation, but you know what? This person is too. And that kind of mentality shift for me of like, this education needs to take place. And if someone doesn't do this, like, it's just kicking the can. So I just love that example you just gave. It just hit home for me. As well. I had a couple examples here. Like, I had a VP of sales make like sexual jokes, like openly. And again, this is that like bro cultureness. And a rep used the F word like openly on the sales floor, as well as even hearing things like, I had one manager say something like, let's not engage in reverse discrimination here, when we were talking about simply the idea of recommending like more diverse candidate. So I think like this like boiler room like type culture, these even like the movie references that people make, I'm like, come on, you're citing an example of a movie as great sales material where they are being homophobic, xenophobic, and derogatory against women. And it's like, this happened in 2020. So we are in many ways making big strides, but we aren't also like, not everyone is with us. So how do we, we have these uncomfortable situations, but how do we get these uneducated people more educated? I think that's, and yes, all those stories were true. And looking at the comments, they were all true.
I've actually had someone give me the DVD Boiler Room when I first started and said, here, watch this. This is what it's going to be like. And I was like, never heard of the movie. I was like, oh gosh, what did I get myself into?
The amount of times I've seen clips of Boiler Room in my sales career. Like, I haven't even watched the movie fully.
Or even the one with, what is it, Alec Baldwin? I forget the name of that one, but that one's like openly homophobic, and it's like, great to always be closing, and it's like, how about always be like helping your customers? So I think this is it. Glenn Ross.
I mean, I usually take the uncomfortable route of just kind of addressing them, being like, hey, can you not say this? Hey, can you not do that? But I mean, if we're going to be honest, that culture sometimes doesn't support that behavior. And I'll just have to be the kind of one who goes to HR and I'll be like, you know what, this is happening. Let's get HR involved so that they can see the seriousness of this and how it's actually affecting my workday. And if you think it's bad that I went to HR, I'm sorry, it's on you. I gave you multiple chances. And like, it just needs to stop, because if I don't speak up for myself, who knows who else is in the room who might also identify, who also just feels even more shy and more uncomfortable to address the situation.
Yeah. And I think it's like not even like it's not just an LGBTQ thing either. It's like the bigger issue at play, because if you're doing that and you're setting up that culture, like that's bad for your customers. That's just bad all around. It's bad for your business. It's bad for your reputation. You know, what does Warren Buffett say? Like, you spend 20 years building a reputation and you lose it in 5 minutes. Well, with social media and all these other things, like, you know, I'm not a big fan of like call out culture or things like that. But at some point, you know, especially with some of these things are a little bit older, like maybe 5 years ago, but some happened very recently. I just think that, you know, the same way there was that like uncomfortableness in the room, like it needs to be acted upon, I think. Yeah, so that one was sorry to be a little bit heavy there. What about let's talk about kind of pivot into accountability a little bit. How do you kind of get at this topic of accountability? Because I feel it so often of like, gosh, that just could have been so much better, right? Like, we still feel it, but like if no one acts on it, we're not going to get better. So how do we make this idea of like inclusive equity, right? There's a difference between equity and equality. We should know what that is. And you know, how do we get at this topic in a much more accountable way?
Yeah, I mean, part of what Tim said really resonated in terms of like being willing to speak up and to bring in HR if that's what's required. And I think what is important to acknowledge with that is there is also a very real risk of discrimination depending on where you live, what your company policies are, and your actual legal protections, or frankly lack thereof, in certain parts of the country and the world. So that is important to keep in mind, because that's very real for a lot of LGBTQ identifying individuals. But for me, it's really like being brave and speaking up, right? I think we've all experienced this. It can feel like the scariest action to take, but by doing that, you are showing everyone around you what accountability looks like, and frankly, what's acceptable versus what's not. And when I think about inclusion, we don't have to think about these huge grand gestures all the time. I think what often gets lost is it can be about seemingly small things, right? So being considerate of people's pronouns and using gender neutral language when you're talking with your colleagues or with customers, right? Quick example, I was in a meeting with some folks at Slack, who's one of my customers, and the person that was leading the meeting, when she went about and shared her introduction, she shared her pronouns, and everyone else in the room or virtual room followed suit, right? Because she set an example. And I think that's a great demonstration of allyship and making it okay and making it like more public.
Love that.
Yeah, that's a really, I really, that's amazing. It's funny you bring up Slack, because one of the things that, you know, the company I work with now is most of us put our pronouns in our Slack name, and you know, that small thing in itself, I think, is a signal, you know, as well, and is important for visibility.
Yeah, and I think too, it's just kind of the pressure of, do I have to speak up, or should I be the one to kind of set that tone? But when you see an ally do it, or when you see another coworker step out of their way, who maybe isn't the one that everyone's looking at the room to like, how do I react to this, or how do I do this? Step up. It's just a huge sense of relief that I can't like even describe. And you just know that like, hey, this person is now someone I can, just because they led with their pronouns, they set this tone. This is someone that I feel comfortable that I can always go to if something comes up, just by saying she, her, or they, them.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, on this issue, like I come from a place that I don't think people should be cynical on this. Like, I think that people are overwhelmingly and mostly good and have those good intentions and want to come from a good place. And that's almost why I want to speak up, because I know that there's like a good person in there somewhere. And by me using a micro interaction as an opportunity for improvement, you know, most of the time, or every time that I have called someone out, they have used it as an opportunity for improvement. Most of the, you know, once I kind of got over like, why do I have to do this to begin with? I think that really helped me like educate that other person, who then maybe that one other person touched so many other lives. Like, I think it, you know, this like, you know, they say like, you know, think globally, act locally. Like I do really think that that's important, because I think that if it wasn't you, what if they said it to someone else, or what if they did that to someone else, and that person didn't have the confidence to speak up? So I just think that's so important. Okay, cool. So so that was a little bit about accountability. So I've always been curious about this question for other just gay people, LGBT, trans, just the whole acronym basically. But how do you come out to your coworkers, or do you come out to your coworkers? If so, like how do you even go about that? So really curious on everyone's take on this.
So for me, it's interesting because I feel like I'm coming out on day one. So I have a family, and our health insurance is through them. So on day one, I feel like I'm coming out to someone at the company, like when, you know, mostly HR and, you know, a CFO, that's the person. For me personally, I do come out, but I try to do it in a way that everyone else does it, right? Who's not LGBTQ, right? Who just says, "Oh yeah, I'm going out to dinner with my girlfriend or my boyfriend or wife or husband." Like, I'll say, "Oh yeah, I got to meet up with my wife after this," right? I want to make it. I'm at a point in my life where I feel comfortable saying that, and for me, opening that door for anyone else around me is incredibly important. So I try to just make it into normal conversation instead of just saying, you know, "Oh, I'm going to go have dinner with my partner," because I feel like, you know, while I like having like neutral language, I think in workplaces it can be incredibly impactful to call it out. Like, I'm not going to have a dinner with my partner. I'm going to have dinner with my wife and son, right? And for me, that makes a big difference. And I've had, you know, experiences where someone came up to me, you know, a junior sales rep, and said, "You're the first person I've heard who's been so openly talking about their family and their life," and it's allowed me to really be able to talk about just like how every sales rep on the floor where he's at was talking about, you know, going out on Tinder dates. Like, he felt like he could say the same thing. And to me, that's big. And part of the reason why I choose to come out, I mean, you know, not even past the onboarding phase to everyone. I think that for me, that's important to help other people. And not just LGBTQ, anyone about any type of identity that might be different from the, you know, norm.
Yeah, and I think something kind of to go off of that is that a lot of people think like, oh, you joined a company, you come out once. But a lot of people don't realize is you're coming out every day you come out, like from ordering like a Starbucks coffee or to meeting a new client. And that's where the allyship really comes in, because I'm very gay presenting, how I dress, how I sound. People know the second I open my mouth or enter a room. And I'm looking towards, if I'm in a room with my boss came to the meeting or another coworker, and I'm looking to them like, hey, like, I'm putting myself out here in front of this group of strangers, like, please be there for me, because the reactions are instantly there when you enter the room. But then also, it can also be a great thing too. Like, I've had clients where I walked into the room and the client was a group of 7 different women, and they like saw me come in, they saw like basically me present myself and come out, if you will. And there's just like a sigh of relief in the room too, because they were like, oh, we're not going to be pitched by like this regular sales bro type of culture. Like, oh, we can actually kind of interact and like feel more comfortable around this type of personality. So sometimes it's also like kind of a superpower, if you will.
Yeah. I love that. My boyfriend, I usually refer to him as partner. but I love Sunanda's answer so much, I'm going to start saying boyfriend. I think that's so impactful. I was thinking it of in a little bit of a different angle, but I think the way that you challenge that is so important. So I love that. I'm going to start saying boyfriend from now on, and I think he would love that too. So we have about 10 minutes left. I do have some additional questions, but it looks like so many people. That's funny. Reading some of the comments. I want to actually answer some of the questions that the audience has posed. So if you have some good ones, go ahead and put them in there. Why don't we do this like rapid fire? So we've all been really thoughtful. We'll tell people how to contact us afterwards. I think Ashley also wants to do like a follow-up panel, so maybe I can save some of those questions too. I have never seen comments like this on a live webinar in my life. So the people listening, you're awesome, and mad love from the panel. But let's do like rapid fire with this. I'll just call on someone to answer. All right. So question number 1: if there are parent ERGs or spaces at work are LGBTQ plus, parent/caregivers welcome, celebrated, fully involved. Anyone want to tackle that one?
Sorry, what was the question?
I think they're trying to say like if you have ERGs or spaces at work, are the significant others, like the parents of the caregivers, welcome and fully involved? We could also translate this to like how do you deal with your partner in like work capacities? Why don't we try that? Like if you ever had events that you had to attend. Has anyone had experiences like that?
I think it goes back to just being authentically you. So your partner is your partner, and when you have a +1, you're going to hopefully feel comfortable with bringing that individual. I think that's just like what we've been talking about with almost normalizing, just being able to see folks that look different from you and be confident in sharing parts of your personal life, and helping also educate folks if you don't feel fully included, because I think with ERGs, and hopefully this gets to the question, but with ERGs, like we're creating these groups of a single identity, and it's important to acknowledge that a lot of folks often like fit into multiple ones. So that feedback is certainly invited and should be welcomed in each of those ERGs, to acknowledge that there's more we all can do individually to be inclusive of like all facets of our identity.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, is that literally the LGBT community goes across every single ERG.
Okay, cool. Tim, this is for you, rapid fire. So many people talk about bringing whole selves to work. Not as much. It's a lot harder for people to bring their whole selves to interviews. Curious for your perspective or experience on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would be a liar if I said I brought my whole self to an interview. You don't really know what you're walking into. Sometimes I will wear baggier clothing. I would debate if I mentioned that I have these LGBT activities that I'm involved in outside of work. Do I put that on my resume? Do I not? Do I change it for this company or not? So yeah, I mean, that's something personally that I think I would still struggle with, is bringing that whole self to the interview. But I think you should, because if you don't bring your whole self to the interview, or if you do bring your whole self to the interview and it's not a good interview experience, right then and there before you even enter the company. So I think that if you are interviewing, you need to bring your whole self, because if you don't feel comfortable in the interview, you save yourself a lot of time by joining a company that won't accept you.
Okay, Sunanda, this is for you. What can straight people do to make the environment at work better for LGBTQ coworkers so that they have a better, more positive experience?
I think my immediate thought is to also speak out when you see something, even if there's no one. I think people have this thing like, oh, there's no one here we're going to offend, right? Like we can say whatever we're going to say. but being able to speak up even when no one's necessarily going to be offended, it's still offensive and it still carries on. So I think putting a voice to that, immediately as an ally is important. And that's what immediately comes to mind, because I've seen it happen. I've heard about it happening, and but I've also seen on the flip side people say, "Hey, that's not cool," regardless of who's in the room. And I think doing that is important.
I love that. It's oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add real quick to that. Even if it's not, a situation in the room, but if someone just has questions, feeling comfortable with asking those questions, because it's so much better to ask and to get someone's feedback and hopefully be better informed for when something does arise where you can interject or help someone understand why what they said or what they did was inappropriate. As long, we're of the, assumption here that most folks are well-intended, and I think that that's true. So don't feel afraid to just ask questions and to learn more.
That's so good. It takes a whole different layer of empathy to be able to ask those questions, and also to stick up for someone where you're not feeling exactly what that person is, right? If you're straight, you're not feeling it directly as they are, but to speak up anyway is just a whole different layer of human compassion. I just love that. Let's see, Tim, do you think sales is more difficult to LGBTQ plus people because of biased or bigoted prospects?
It can be. I've run into this before. But what you need to do then is just kind of bring in your manager and really lean in on your manager for that one. When it happened, my manager might not have even realized that it was happening, but he was just like, well, Tim is your person. Like, okay, Tim can help you with this. Tim is more than qualified to help you with your account. And just kind of pushing back. And usually what I find is that person either changes their mind, or they just within their company provide you with a new point of contact within the company. But yeah, really having your manager kind of stick behind you and be like, nope, this is your rep. He's doing everything he's supposed to be doing.
I love that. Goes back to feeling like someone has your back that we were talking about earlier. Okay, let's see. Rachel, what do you think about recruiting for culture fit?
I think this goes back to the idea of stereotypes in sales, right? So culture fit often means, is this person going to get along with everyone else? Which really just means, is this person like everyone else that we have here, right? It's that antiquated idea of what success will look like in your org, in your role. And I just think it's been overused so much, and that's what it means. I think we should be bringing about like diversity. Is this person going to bring a diverse perspective to our organization, to the way in which we conduct sales?
Wow, that is so powerful. Culture fit often means that they are like everyone else here. I think that's super powerful. Okay, cool. So let's see if there's one more question. I'd like to do one more. Okay, we had what experience do you have advocating for diversity and inclusion in the workspace, especially when you are not in an executive or leadership position where you can make decisions with a direct impact on staffing culture? And this will be our last one.
I mean, I think it's kind of a little different because I'm also a white male, but also speaking up on behalf of other minorities in the room. So say that you're in a meeting, and for instance, I find this happen to a lot of women on my team, and I'll just kind of repeat like, oh, that was a great point that Erica just made. Like, hey, like, let's build upon this, instead of just kind of talking over like, oh, hey, and like reaching out. If people are talking over, reaching out to maybe another minority in the room, be like, hey, like, what is your thought on this? And kind of bringing them into the conversation, and then supporting each other as minorities too, because it's the best way to kind of get along.
I love that way to wrap up. So that that being LGBTQ plus isn't always just about advocating for that group, right? Although that group does need help in the arena of sales, but there are other groups that need help too. Particularly women and other minority groups as well on the sales floor. And I think that's so important. So I love that you kind of bring that up. So that is our last question. I want to make sure that we be cognizant of everyone's time. I really want to thank the panel for dedicating their time and energy to educating all of us today. I've learned so much myself. I'm like clapping inside. This has been so fun and just an informative experience. For me, I think that this conversation was that modern take that we were talking about at the top. I look forward to learning from you all in the future. My last question for everyone real quick is, what's the best way to stay in touch or reach out for additional resources for those wanting to learn more and stay informed? So, Tim.
I guess you can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to discuss more. But in terms of resources, I would also love to know. I don't really know any. I've kind of done my searching around. But yeah, this is my first time hearing anything about this type of event or meeting other LGBTQ plus sellers. So I think you both are so cool.
Cool. Sunanda.
I would say Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm active on both. Probably more active on Twitter, although not everything's going to be work related, but it will all be, somewhat related to this conversation. I'm pretty passionate about that and very upfront. I think, I've known the other side of sales, Casey and Ashley for a while. I've done, an interview with them, and I think what they're doing in the space is incredibly important. And so, they list out a lot of organizations and allies as well. And, I think that's a great place to start.
Awesome. Rachel.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that. The other side of sales has been amazing as a resource, and continue to follow the other webinars that they have upcoming. Folks want to connect with me, LinkedIn and Twitter are the best ways.
Awesome. Great. So great to hear from you on that. I saw someone mention Out in Tech. I've been going there a lot more recently. It's a Slack group. It's like the only Slack group I don't have muted notifications on besides my company. So I recommend everybody go in there. Thank you all so much. We've asked everyone to make a contribution to a charity today, and hope you all will partake in that as well. The charity we chose is familyequality.org. They help with advancing equality for LGBT families. And just thank you everyone one more time. And a special thank you to the other side of sales for, again, being so forward thinking on this matter. This has been so fun and informative, and moderating this discussion has been an honor for me. Thank you, everyone.